We all know the shock the first Cayenne was to the car guy religion, but the lesser known story was the first go-fast Cayenne. That was like 160 grand. We were all scratching our head. You gotta be kidding me, no one's gonna pay that much. We were all wrong, because they couldn't make enough. So much so, they now rebadge it, sell it from another country, and that's like 250 to 300 grand, which brings about a prudent question. Is there more room for ever-increasing speeds and performance in SUVs alongside ever-increasing prices? So definitely a valid question, so much so, it's not just the usual suspects that do things like this. There, of course, are the Audis, the Porsches, and the BMWs of the world. Even Cadillac now makes a high-performance version of the Escalade, which of course means that we have to go back to one of the originals and see what they've changed while we're focusing on new Cayennes. And here they've made some updates for 2024. Now, we put out a tech review with Andre of TFL Car and TFL Truck. We went into the deep dive details of like the change in the front, specifically the lights, the grille, as well as the light signature in the rear of the car. They've also changed some bits on the inside, and if you put it all together, it's a very heavy mid-cycle refresh, meaning it's not a totally new vehicle, it's just updated. However, while we weren't paying attention, or really paying attention to Cayennes with 650 horsepower, they very secretly slid something into the X5 and the X6 M, and that is a mild hybrid system. You see, it's still the same 4.4 twin turbocharged V8, remember 617 horsepower. Now there is an electric motor, but not like other BMW mild hybrid systems where there's an electric motor hanging off the accessory drive. Rather, this is an electric motor that sits between the transmission and the engine. Sounds familiar? Cough, Mercedes. And what they've done here is they've added an additional 12 horsepower from the electric motor, but more importantly, 147 pounds of torque. Now, that sounds great. Does it do anything for the fuel economy, being this is now a hybrid? Rather than tell you yes or no, let me share the fuel economy here. 13, 18, 15 combined, so you do the math. Performance, that's something that's a bit different. Now, as a basis of comparison, the M2, the car we fell in love with only a couple of months ago, that does 0 to 60 in like 3.9 seconds and weighs very far south of 4,000 pounds. This is well north of 5,000 pounds, and 0 to 60, this is 3.7 seconds. In terms of VMAX, 155 miles an hour, with the right trip down the options list, 177 miles an hour. Now, if you and I were to interpret what this all means, yes, it looks a bit different, but in reality, is it an X5 M hybrid? No, it's not about that. Instead, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, this is more about lower tailpipe emissions for tightening regulations around the world, while simultaneously adding more performance for idiots like you and I. Now, if you see value in this episode or any other episode, would greatly appreciate a favor. Can you click the like button, subscribe, or share these episodes? Vielen Dank. Okay, let's you and I cut through the crap. It's an SUV, it's going to be heavy. 5,498 pounds, or depending on express your weights and measures, 2,396 kilograms. With that, full fat on all 4 modes that I could find that one could change. Oh yeah. Oh, hey now! It doesn't come alive, it explodes. It moves from the personality of a previous X5, maybe the fast one, the V8, not quite the M, to something that has your hair on fire. It's very different. You'd think, oh, okay, you know, they did some hybridization or electrification. Mercedes has done this in the past. This isn't a big deal. Here, it's a bigger deal. I would argue the placement here, because BMW, we've discussed, they've had electrification with 48-volt mild hybrid systems for a while, but if I'm really being honest here, they kind of cheaped out. They put it in the wrong place, at least the electric motor. By putting it between the engine and transmission, you get the most benefit. Wow, this is a completely different vehicle. It's just everything is significantly more immediate, which is highly unusual for a vehicle that's this tall and weighs as much as a house. So let's go back to that first-gen Cayenne Turbo we referenced at the top of the episode. That was successful not just because it was expensive and fast, it was successful because they applied all of the driving dynamics experience for, what was it, 60, 70 years at that point, to a large, tall vehicle. This was successful when it first came out for effectively the same reason, but they took a different avenue. Yeah, there was definitely an M engine in it, and they've made it lower and they changed some of the suspension, but this was successful in terms of driving dynamics because they added more structure to it, more than other performance SUVs. Like we talked about, shearing plates and braces over the engine. And that brings us to today, where if we were to reflect upon the history of this equation of vehicle, no, it wasn't bleeding edge, and no, it wasn't number one, but it definitely was number two, and they brought their own innovation to the table, which means the folks in Munich were sitting around thinking, well, everything old is new again, as you could tell by that color, so why don't we bring more of that stiffness to the table? For example, you know how they have the adjustable engine mounts in a Porsche? Here they have dampers in the engine mounts, but they added that now to the transmission mount. And then while we're there, they've also added structure to the transmission tunnel. So now the overall vehicle, meaning the structure of the vehicle, the body in white, is stronger because it's not just the bits they add to the suspension, it's how they connect the front and rear parts of the car. Okay, so as you and I press into driving dynamics, and wow, there are a lot of rocks on the road there, we need to have a bit of a comparison discussion with the Cayenne Turbo GT that we just recently drove. It is very helpful that you and I drove this right before we got back into the X5 M, because it's been a long time since we've driven it. And really the headline here, it is so much sharper. It's a stiffer vehicle. Like, even in the most basic setting of the suspension, this is a much, I guess, rougher ride would probably be the best way to describe it. And for the avoidance of doubt, when I say rougher ride, it's not that it's a bad ride. The ride quality is there in terms of composure. It's just so much stiffer. This thing, by design, was made to be, I guess, raw is the best way to put it. Like, I like ride quality like this, but then again, I've owned two Elises. I'm a Porsche guy. I don't like comfort in ride quality. And that goes a long way in comparing what this thing is. I mean, look what it can do. This is 5,500 pounds, and I am screaming around corners here. There is literally no pitch. I don't feel any squat as I'm getting very aggressive and pushing this beyond its normal planes of motion. That's unusual for a vehicle this tall and something that weighs this much. I'd still put the Cayenne Turbo GT up here, but this is now so much closer on that spectrum. Now, yeah, we could say some of the bits we talked about earlier, where they further added more stiffening, that probably contributes to it. But this, I would say it's more the tuning and the stiffening, and then you layer on the more instantaneous torque from the electric motor, put it all together, and that's where it becomes so much more, raw is not enough of a term, stiff is not enough of a term, and immediate is not enough of a term. It's, remember those commercials, this is your brain, and the guy had an egg, and then he put the egg in a frying pan, and he said, this is your brain on drugs? That's this. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the options game with today's contestant, a car you guys seem to like a lot. You see, I shot a tech review of this with Andre over at TFL Car in all of like 15 minutes because BMW was throwing us out from the M2 International Drive, but we had yet to shoot this because they had it hiding over in a corner no one could drive, and we did something like 200,000+ views, so vielen Dank. With that, the now price on this car, built in, $122,300. So huge asterisk there. This one is a competition, so that tells me there'll be a non-competition coming to the market shortly, which I'm thinking would be cheaper. Then there's that color, Urban Green. I can already see the comments. You guys probably going to hate that. But in person, this color is exquisite. Yes, it probably is similar to a color we've seen on a Dodge Dart from 1969. However, this, it's so rich. It's so unique, especially for this proportion of design. It's not cheap. It's $5,000, but I would say worth every penny, especially when you consider the interior of this car, which is Taruma Brown, and that is a full leather interior, the merino grade of leather interior. That adds an additional $3,500. Granted, we're almost 10% of the price of the car, but man, oh man, if you're gonna spend 120 grand, you might as well have it look stunning as it's going down the road. And even the details inside the car, the infotainment system, reflect the urban green choice. Now, even though this has 617 horsepower, it is still a practical vehicle for folks with a lot of money, so we need to talk about the executive package. That adds front and rear heated and cooled seats. The front cup holders are heated and cooled, and then the front seats have a massage function. $3,100. Then we have to pay $650 for the M compound brakes. Now, I am a huge fan of the M compound brakes. I've told you in many episodes, probably the best non-carbon ceramic option out there, and definitely work with this size and weight of vehicle. But this is the competition. Why are we paying extra money for the better brakes? And why do they have black calipers? How about like red or urban green or something like that? So let's fix that. Then we have to pay an additional $2,500. I would argue that's important. Why? Because it's the M driver's package, and yes, that changes the tires, but that also changes the VMAX from 155 miles an hour to 177 miles an hour. Then we spent, what, $8,500 in making this car look fancy, and the base price is what, over $120,000. So you're already in for a penny, you might as well be in for a pound. How about $3,400 for the Bowers and Wilkins stereo? And the only other thing we pay extra for is the destination handling. No, not von Deutschland. Rather, this is made in the good old US of A in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So we pay $995 for a destination, which brings us to a total retail price of, belt in, $141,445. Still less than $160 we paid for a Cayenne many years ago. Okay, so let's you and I switch to my softer homebrew setting and have a discussion about details in light of what we just learned about pricing. Yeah, there's changes here, and it goes along with some of the bits we've discussed, but these much more subtle. Yeah, we've got the screen like we've seen in other BMWs. This is cascading throughout the lineup, not because it's more functional, because it's going to save money for BMW, let's be honest. But then they've taken some budget and they've put it into this being much fancier on the inside. Like, for example, the lower door panels, it's got contrast stitch that are the tri-color logo for BMW M that is repeated on the seat belts. That part is not new. On the door panel is new. That extends out to the shifter with the tri-color contrast stitching, which really put it all together. Are those details enough to justify some of the dollars and cents we talked about? That's really in the eye of the beholder. Then we press on to some other changes here. Notice the vents are different, and here they've kind of picked up the theme from the new 7 Series. Like, notice you don't see many vents here. It's lovely to look at, but I would want to go back to a different vent here to get more airflow. The tactile feel is improved here. It feels like a better piece of kit. It feels like something that is a cut above a standard SUV, even a performance standard SUV. Again, a lot of small changes, but you do notice a larger difference. Okay, so what have you and I learned today? I would argue a lot, most of it unexpected. You see, if we were to take the changes we talked about on the inside, put that together with the changes we talked about on the outside, both in this episode as well as the tech review episode, and then balance that against all the changes underneath the hood and underneath the vehicle, the equation, it would be somewhat out of balance. You see, this is far more different than I expected from a car that really is the same generation, because this is really just an update of that. It's now, we talked about, more raw, more sharp. Really, the only way to describe it is in like muscle car terms. Remember back in the day, there were Ford people and GM people that would argue, and the Mopar would always like end the argument but they were somewhat difficult to live with. Like a Hemi was cold-blooded. This is kind of like the Hemi, but not the engine terms, more the driving dynamics. It's that kind of raw, if you understand what I'm talking about. Not a bad thing, just very different, but for a very specified kind of person. And that brings us to the wish list, which sadly is about very boring things like money. I don't know if it's because I'm a cheapskate, but that seems like a hell of a lot of cash to me. Maybe it's because I'm spending too much time at Cayennes. Either way, my ask is this. There is probably going to be a non-competition. How about we make the Delta more than 10 grand like it has been in the past? How about 20 grand? And in the process, maybe make it less sharp to appeal to a broader group of people. But I am one man. This is the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on word, MotoManTV on word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you found this episode fascinating, I would highly suggest you watch our Cayenne S episode, the 2024. Yeah, watch the Cayenne Turbo GT, but the Cayenne S is a bit closer to this because they had to make the same changes to that engine to make it more, not so much efficient, less emissions, so that engine will be in places like Europe longer. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.